Hi, Joel.
Hi, Aaron.
Thanks for taking time to do this today.
Oh, I'd love it.
We have been in the midst of a sermon series on the fruits of the Spirit
hmm
and talking about how we savor the sweetness of the fruits of the Spirit. And this being our last week in the sermon series, I wanted to think about that element of savoring the fruits of the Spirit a little bit more. And I was thinking about the different fruits that we enjoy as a family. You know, Michael really loves apples, and apples are best in October. They both really like watermelon. Watermelon doesn't taste good in December, but you can really savor the sweetness in July and August. I happen to love rhubarb. It's really hard to find throughout the year, but in May, it's available in plenty. Um, what is your favorite fruit, and when do you find it's best to be enjoyed?
Hmm. Well, I actually think my favorite fruit changes based on the season.
Oh, interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I love cherries, but really cherries are only good kind of in the summer, early summer, like midsummer. And I also like apples, but as you said, apples are really only good in the fall. You can have them year round, but it's best in the fall. Or peaches are only good certain times of year. So I really find that what I crave oftentimes is when that particular fruit is in season.
I know your mom had a tradition of canning peaches
hmm
for many years, and that we got to enjoy the sweet nectar of that in the winter time.
Yep, a lot of that was the sugar syrup that we
The
used.
sugar syrup.
So, um, but yes, it was a joy to can peaches, and it was quite a laborious process. But then you do get to enjoy them all winter long, and it is fun.
So you are the son of Lynn and Tom Pierre Fitzgerald, who are both United Methodist pastors.
hmm
And I wonder if you could talk about growing up in the church and growing up as a double pastor's kid, how you learned about the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I learned the names of the fruits of the spirit just with a Sunday school song, and so I think that's how I learned about them. But I think the fruits of the spirit really are sort of some virtues that we can inculcate, some virtues that we can are evidence of our sort of right relationship with God, and so those virtues, those things that we exhibit, um, come come clear in certain seasons of our life and in certain times. And so, I think being in the church my entire life, I could see times when folk did live out those virtues, live out those fruits, and also times when they did not live out those fruits, when they did not exhibit love or joy or patience or kindness. And so I think I got a good sense of how that works. And I think, the reality is not everyone can live out everything all the time, but I do think the presence or absence of the fruits are a way for us to assess both our own lives, how things are going in our own lives, and also the life of the church we are a part of. And so I think that is something that I took from my childhood.
Sometimes fruits can sour or get bruised or beaten up, and so
Yeah, or I mean, I just think sometimes if the fruits of the spirit are I mean, it's literally the fruit, the what comes from the spirit's presence in our lives, or our recognition and living with the spirit's presence in our lives. Sometimes we in our humanity can say no to that, or can not choose not to live the way the spirit wants us to live. And that's not always great, but that is part of being human. Um, and part of it that is then to, uh, try to invite the spirit back in so that we might continue to exhibit
mm,
those fruits.
I like that. Inviting the spirit back in so that you might bear fruit.
hmm Okay, so when I was growing up, my dad was the pastor of South United Methodist Church in Grand Rapids, and I attended there with my sister. My mom was a pastor of another church, so we attended with my dad, and they had a kids program and youth group. This was the mid to late '90s, so boom times for church, and we that's where I went to Sunday school. That's where I learned about the fruits of the Spirit. And it was a a good time. We were there for 10 years. But then my dad got into some fights with some of the congregants around political issues. You can imagine in the church, it's hard to believe, I know, but over political issues. And they eventually asked my dad to leave. And that was incredibly hurtful for us as a family because it was not just them asking him to leave, it was asking us to leave, like the whole family had to leave the church. And that was an experience of seeing the flip side of how those fruits were not being lived out, how the Spirit was not being lived out in the life of the congregation, and the damage that that can do, the harm and the hurt that that can have. But I think one reason why I am, still within the church, one reason I did not at that point decide that, well, to hell with all you, I'm going to do my own thing, is that we then afterwards went to the church my mom was serving for a year, Plainfield United Methodist Church on the near north side of Grand Rapids. And they sort of welcomed us in. They exhibited those fruits of the Spirit of love and kindness. I joined the choir, even though I cannot sing and have no tune to me. So they allowed me to join the choir, and it was a place of community. And that is actually the church, even though I had attended with my dad for 10 years. That was the church I was confirmed in, because it was a church that was exhibiting those fruits of the Spirit, that love and kindness and patience. And so it was an opportunity to see that the Spirit is moving and the Spirit is at work, even if we as humans don't recognize it or don't respond to it. So even if we experience situations and seasons where others are not exhibiting the fruits, that does not mean the Spirit isn't at work in the world around us.
I appreciate hearing that story, although I've heard it many times.
Hmm.
I wondered if you would tell a story from growing up with Alice and Jack Fitzgerald as your grandparents and how the Spirit moved through them, even in their adult life and later years.
So my dad's parents were Alice and Jack Fitzgerald. Jack was a civil engineer, and Alice was a homemaker for most of her life. But they were also very deep and spiritual people. I mean, I think spiritual in the literal sense that they had a deep faith, and that sort of grew over time. And as I was, around in their retirement and their old age, I could see the ways in which that spirit came forth and what the ways of that fruit was exhibited. And it wasn't just they were more than just good church people who, went to church on Sunday, and they were church people who lived out their faith even when it was hard. So they lived in Cadillac, Michigan, and in the late 90s, there were some white supremacist groups, the KKK group around Cadillac, Michigan, and I can't remember what the occasion was, but there was going to be a white supremacist march through Cadillac. And then there were some counter protesters, and there was a big fear. This is rural northern Michigan. There's not a lot of not a lot of police presence up there. There's some real fear about violence and about what could happen. And so Jack and Alice were trained as sort of violence interrupters, as folk who could be a peaceful presence within that setting so that violence did not take place. And I think at the end of the day, they didn't end up having to do that because I think the march was postponed or canceled or something. But they went to a couple weeks worth of training about what do you do in high stress, high conflict situations? How do you engage with people who might be yelling or screaming or threatening or saying horrendous things and remain calm, and also try to engage with them on the level of humans, how to have patience with them and not react to them. So I saw that, and I saw them living that out, which is pretty amazing. They were not these were not radical rabble rousers, or they were sort of straight and narrow, silent generation folk. My grandpa was a World War II vet and served in Europe, and so these were not radicals by any means, but they were people who felt deeply enough the faith that they had, the Spirit moved and they responded to the Spirit's movement deeply enough that they were able to show some of those fruits in amazing ways.
So fast forward a little bit in your life.
Hmm.
When you were a young adult, you had some pretty amazing experiences where you got to travel abroad,
Sure.
both to study and to serve. You spent time in Sydney, Australia,
Hmm.
and you spent time in Belfast, Northern Ireland.
Hmm.
Are there things that you can recall about what you learned about the fruits of the Spirit in those places?
After college, I took a year off from school and was a volunteer in Belfast, Northern Ireland through the Presbyterian Church. I spent time working at a Presbyterian church in Belfast and then also at a social service agency. One of the things about Belfast is, as folk may know, is been riven by sectarian violence for literally centuries, most notably in the 60s, 70s, and 80s through the Troubles, essentially a civil war in this small part of Ireland that killed thousands of people and displaced many, and it's this huge traumatic event. And so the service agency I worked with was located in a poor working class area of Belfast in what's called an interface neighborhood. And so that means it was a neighborhood where nationalists who are predominantly Catholic, but not always, but nationalists lived next door to Protestants or Unionists. And oftentimes they would have to build walls in between the two different groups of people. They would have to build barriers to keep them apart, which then, of course, reinforces the animosity and the distrust and the hatred between the different people. And so I was working with kids and with older folk in that setting to just do, sort of kids club type stuff or helping with senior meals and that kind of thing, and building relationships with folk. And so I think one of the stories I like to tell about that is when I was having to walk home, I would have to walk through. The social service agency was primarily in a Protestant neighborhood. I have to walk through a Catholic neighborhood to get to where I was living at the time. And so I walked after work one day. I was walking. And I saw one of the kids who was part of our kids club, and she saw me walking down the street, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I live on the other side of this road. I got to walk down this way to get there." And she said, "Oh, I've never walked down there before," because it was on the other side. She had never, and this literally was, less than the distance of a city block in Marshall, right? It was not a long distance. It was not the other side of the moon. It was literally maybe a quarter of a mile, and yet she had never walked that path because it was the other side. It was those other people over there who are our enemies. And, this was a probably, 7 or 8 year old girl. So not someone who had grown up or even lived through much of the troubles, but had just lived in that environment where there was others, where there are other people.
The boundary existed in her mind.
Yeah, a boundary. I mean, in some ways, it was a literal boundary for her. Like she could not conceive of someone she knew um, crossing that boundary. That was so me doing that, me being a boundary crosser, was something that was sort of outrageous or unusual to her. And so that was an instance of exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit, right? We often sometimes think of living out our faith or engaging with the fruits of the Spirit as, these big hard things or these things that are pre-planned or are things that we have to are things that we have to think through a lot of times. But really, the fruits of the Spirit are outgrowths of our desire to love God and love our neighbor. And in doing that, oftentimes we are able to show the fruits of the Spirit without even knowing of it. So,
Mm.
I did not set out that day. I had a long day of work, and I was just going home, and I had no plan to, be an example of someone crossing boundaries or showing this girl a broader world or inviting her to reflect on her prejudices and where she grew up. I was just walking home. But, being aligned and being in tune with the spirits moving in that work was able to do something, exhibit some fruits of the Spirit.
That's great. And it reminds me, Joel, of a scripture passage, and it comes from the book of Proverbs, which is a book of wisdom, and chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insight. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight.
And I think we in the church sometimes uh, often rely on our own insight. Sometimes we often rely on the thing that, well, everyone knows this. Everyone knows what we do. Everyone knows this thing. Um, when in reality, it's just our own thing. It's not necessarily the fruit of the Spirit. It's not necessarily the Spirit's work at us. It's just the thing that we've always done, which may be good, may be bad, but it is just that. It's our own insights. And so to continually think about, is this the work of the Spirit? Am I trusting God? Or am I just relying on my own prejudices, my own knowledge, my own understanding? Um, Let me give you an example of
I
that.
would love an example.
Great. So, growing up, the church I mentioned that I grew up in Grand Rapids, my sister, ended up becoming a United Methodist pastor as well, she would invite her friends to come to church with her. And in middle school, she invited one of her friends to come was totally unchurched, had never set foot in a church. Her parents weren't going to church, which was, unusual in that day and age, but also just someone I had friends at school who didn't go to church, but like most of my people I knew were church people. And I'm not talking about like, we would talk about theology all day, but just knew the rhythms of the church. And so this friend of my sister's came to worship, and during the announcement time, someone announced, we're going to be having a potluck next Sunday, so bring a dish to pass. And the friend looks over at my sister and says, "What's a potluck?"
Mm.
And I thought that was, as a, 8 or 9-year-old boy, I thought, well, that's crazy. Everyone knows what a potluck is, of course, because potlucks are the third sacrament of the church. It is the thing that we do.
Right.
But I realized, oh, not everyone knows that. Not everyone knows what a potluck is. And this friend of my sister's could have been exhibiting all of the fruits of the Spirit, could have been exhibiting love and joy and kindness and peace. But because she didn't know what a potluck was, immediately in my young mind, there was this sense of, oh, you're different than us. You are not one of us. You don't know this thing that we do that is central to who we are. Um, and so that made me think about, well, what is a potluck? Why do we do potlucks? Are potlucks really sacramental in that way, or is it just a tradition that we have started? And that's not to say that sharing meals together isn't bad. It's just that so much of what we do in the church, so much of what we think about is oftentimes just tradition that's been passed on, or something that may have had a good reason at one point, but we've just kept doing it. And it's good for us to remind ourselves, is this exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit? Is this thing exhibiting love and joy and peace and patience? Or is it a thing that, as Proverbs say, it's us relying on our own insight? It's us trusting that we know best, and sort of ignoring the urgings of the Spirit. So I think one of the things that Scripture um, gets at, I think, is some humility,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you recite the fruits of the Spirit, it is sort of about being humble and being willing to take a step back and acknowledge that maybe we don't know everything, maybe we don't know all that there is, and that maybe God is calling us to something different. Maybe God is calling us to something else, and to thinking about what is it about this that is of God? What is it about this that is not of God? The Ignatius of Loyola was a 15th century Catholic priest, started the Jesuit order, and one of the things the Jesuits do is called the Examen, and it's a daily ritual of looking at the end of the day, and actually midway through the day too. You look at what has happened, and you say, Where did I see God's presence? Where did I feel God's presence? And where didn't I feel God's presence? What in that I said and did, or what in the other said and did, exhibited in some other language the fruits of the Spirit, and what didn't exhibit the fruits of the Spirit? An acknowledgement that, we don't always exhibit the fruits of the Spirit, an acknowledgement that this is something that we might need to work at. And that if we don't take that time, if we don't do that, taking a step back, then we might not have that opportunity.
I think the opportunity presents itself to examine what you see in yourself, and also sometimes to have conversation or reflection with others. Have you ever seen someone else exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit and been able to name that for them? To say, I see God working through you as you do this thing, and I just want to celebrate that.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the job of a pastor, right? Is to see the fruits in other people.
Talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, no, but I think it is important for us to name that and to acknowledge the ways in which we see God working in and through other people. I think one thing as a parents of young children, it is hard to have, especially young kids, infants or newborns. That's a stressful time. You are sleep deprived and you don't know what's going on, and you've got this little creature that you're responsible for, and you don't know what the hell you're doing, and all of this stuff. And it can be hard to feel like you are doing well. It can be hard to feel like, how am I not screwing this up? And so I found in it's important, especially for parents of really young kids, to acknowledge the ways in which, no, you're doing fine. You are doing okay. You are doing the thing you need to do of taking care of this. Because, patience, we think of patience as, oh, I'm this serene, yoga-like presence, when all this crazy stuff is happening. And sometimes patience is just, not throwing something through the wall when your kid gets up for the 18th time at night, and going to do the hard thing. Sometimes patience just means getting up and doing the hard thing, even if you hate it, even if you think when is this ever going to end? That is exhibiting a fruit of the Spirit. And so, naming that for other people is important, because sometimes we don't see those fruits within ourselves. Sometimes we don't see the way in which we are exhibiting patience and kindness, and generosity towards other people. One of the things about the fruits of the Spirit is, it's not necessarily that they're like emotions, right? So it's not about, kindness isn't about feeling like you like everybody all the time, everywhere. Patience is not losing your temper or feeling upset or mad. It is what we do with those feelings. It is how we act with those feelings. Humbleness is not thinking that, oh, we don't know anything. We are, as Kelvin says, worms in the dirt.
Oh, Calvin.
Yes, it is more that we exhibit actions and behaviors that reflect those fruits. And so, patience is not getting upset or mad at your kids, or even wanting to scream at them. Patience is, in the midst of that, choosing to do something different. Humility isn't always, always saying, oh, everyone else is right, or always saying, oh, I'm never right. It is acknowledging that this is who I am, this is what I am, but I acknowledge other people are themselves too, and we need to have some humility about that. And so, when we think about the fruits of the Spirit, I don't think it's something about feeling certain feelings in all instances, or just being a nice Christian person, but it is when life is hard, when we have those seasons of hardness, it is understanding that exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit isn't about an internal state necessarily. It's about how we choose to exhibit and act through those things.
If you would like to plant yourself in the fertile soil of Marshall United Methodist Church and work on bearing some of the fruits of the Spirit, work on cultivating those fruits within yourself, and also work on naming how you see others bearing those good fruits, we would love to invite you into some opportunities to be a part of a small group, to worship here more regularly, or to take the next step and to serve. In the midst of the summer, we have opportunities where you can serve in our community garden. We also have Vacation Bible School coming up August 14th and 15th, and we would love to put you to work in those places so that you might bear fruit that leads to good work and to building the kingdom of God. Thank you so much.